Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 11, our final stepping in learning forum for the unit. So this week, as you can see on the slide, we're going to be exploring curriculum. So this will support you in completing the third case study. So the third one's been put up now, the script for the screenplay. It's a really juicy one, lots of critical incidences in there, and I will open up the session for some questions about assessment tasks 2 a little bit later on. But first we're going to explore curriculum. So as well as supporting concepts and understandings around this third case study, importantly, it's going to give you a foundation to assist you in knowing, understanding and applying curriculum during your placements and moving into professional practice. So for those of you that have had a look at the curriculum, the Australian curriculum website, you can see it is huge. So there is so much involved in it. So it's very important and it's your responsibility as well to have a good look at it, to unpack it. You would have also had the opportunity to have a look at Jen's seminar, read the allocated pages of the textbook, and again, have a look at that ACARA clip as well. So that gave you a pretty good overview of what the Australian curriculum is like and what you need to think about. Just a sec, there we go. Just making sure everyone's muted. Beautiful. Okay, so from watching the ACARA clip, you would have developed a pretty good idea of what the curriculum looks like, and as I said, how expansive it is. We're going to start with a tour around the actual website because this is where you're going to be spending a lot of time while on placement, especially those primary and secondary students. So the website was developed by ACARA and it includes a range of resources to support teachers in implementing the Australian curriculum. So it has illustrations of practice, work samples, teaching and learning tools, as well as some really good links to research. So this is important in guiding your critical reflection. And as we discussed in our pedagogy week, it will help you unpack the individual pedagogical frameworks in each setting or school. And on the slide, you can see that Jen has given us some questions to guide your understandings. So we've got the website open here. And as you can see, it's got and if you had a look at the clip, it showed you all of the different components of it. But looking at the questions that Jen has provided us, how many dimensions does the Australian curriculum have? Any thoughts?
3.
3. Yay, well done. So we've got learning areas, general capabilities, and the important cross-curriculum priorities. So what about the learning areas? How many learning areas do we have? 8. Those learning areas there we can see under the F10 curriculum tab. So we've got English, mathematics, science, humanities and social sciences, the arts, technologies, health and physical education and languages. And so of course other things sit underneath those as well. So for example, does anyone have business as a specialist area? Where do you think that might sit?
Oh shoot.
Probably somewhere in social or humanity or technologies.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. So humanities and social sciences. And then, the learning area of science, the subject area, all of the sciences would sit under there. So that's the particular areas, but there are also sub areas as well. And I guess there would be different levels as well. So in English and maths, you'd have your different levels of maths and English as well. And of course, the arts is expansive as well. It would involve dance, drama, film, media, um, all sorts of things. And of course, overlapping with technologies as well. So um, lots of different areas for you to explore. And for our secondary students, don't just stick to your curriculum areas as well. It's important that you have a look at other areas. So for example, if we think about maths, how does maths fit in with technologies, for example? That's a really important one. My son Luca in year 10, he is really into digital technologies, and he's doing film and lots of different interest in those areas. But of course, he's also doing maths, and he really doesn't like it. He can't see the reason behind learning some of the areas in maths. Why do I need that for my future? And his teacher has been really good at making those connections between maths and IT. When he talks about, needing to be able to program, he's really interested in special effects and things in film. Maths is directly linked to that. So the teacher's been wonderful in making those connections, and Luca can see then that that is a real priority for him. So we've looked at the learning areas. The next question was, how many general capabilities does the curriculum have? So if we look there, we've got general capabilities include literacy, numeracy, information and communication technology, capability, critical, creative thinking, personal and social capability, ethical understanding, and intercultural understanding. And then how many cross-curriculum priorities? So again, looking at the cross-curriculum priorities, we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, and sustainability. So cross-curriculum priorities, they provide teachers with ideas about how they might teach the content, taking these three areas into consideration. So it's about using these and adapting and, making sure that you take all of these into consideration across the broad curriculum. So there are so many layers in this, and in the Akara clip, it talked about some of the new functions, the search functions as well. So I really want you, prior to going out on placement, on your first placement, I want you to develop a good understanding. It will really support you, and it will give you more confidence as well, going in there knowing that you have a good understanding, and it's also going to impress your supervising teacher. It's not their job, their role to teach you the curriculum. That's your responsibility. You will have other units around that, as we'll talk about later, but it is your responsibility to have a look at it and unpack it. And it will take a little bit of time and effort. So I guess as a pre-service teacher in primary and secondary settings, the curriculum, it really is the core, I guess. You'll need to be familiar with the curriculum subject areas, and not just your own in terms of secondary. You'll need to think about how they're taught, the achievement standards involved for each one. You're also need to know the specific key concepts and the learning outcomes that describe specifically what children and students are able to understand, to know, and do within each of these subject areas. Also, you'll need to consider ways to integrate the curriculum across and within these learning areas, as I discussed with Luca's maths teacher. It's just one example of many. So this is really going to involve finding authentic links between subjects, so to assist students in developing more in-depth understandings and increasing their engagement and motivation. Again, Luca is a good example of that. He's really interested in terms of integrating the curriculum across and I guess as well as this, you're going to require a good understanding of local and global issues as well. So you can provide an authentic context within students, within
Angela, you keep dropping out.
understanding and the sophistication and skills. So expected at the
Angela, Angela, I don't know if you can hear us, but you keep dropping out.
I'm sorry about that. As I said, I've been having terrible issues. Is it really bad? Am I sounding like I'm speaking underwater?
It just stopped now, but like it sounded like you were just non-existent, I guess would be the best way to explain it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bear with me. As I've been having this issue, I've actually I've made a recording without students of the learning forum, just in case things don't go well. So if you do miss anything in this particular session, you can go back and have a look at the recording. So rest assured you won't miss out on anything, just in case, because I'd hate you to miss anything, especially if it's something that you're specifically interested in. All right, so bear with me. I'll continue on. Hopefully things will improve. All right, so where was I? So making sure that you have a good understanding of the levels or the sophistication of knowledge that is needed. I guess in terms of assessment, you will be using formative and summative assessment and observation, so data collected to measure your students' progress and then to make further steps for improvement of your teaching and for your students' learning as well. So, of course, individually based. And sharing and analysing this data will also be an important factor. So this will be collaboratively with your colleagues, so individually and then at a school level as well when it comes to writing and discussing whole units. There'll be lots of collaboration there. Another area as well is sharing student progress with parents. And as a beginning teacher, this can sometimes be an area that is a little bit frightening for some students because this is going to need to be a priority. So report cards, parent-teacher interviews, and that's going to vary from school to school. But it's also going to involve ongoing, really good communication and developing trusting relationships with parents so that you can communicate and work together to assist individual students. How are we going? Am I still dropping out?
You've been fine for the past hour, like since I last said.
Okay, cross fingers. All right, so another thing, I guess, in that final point, as well as a deep understanding of the curriculum content, you're also going to need to consider the many and varied factors that influence curriculum decisions. So in your specific context, and you need to make sure that the content and the way you're delivering it is meaningful and relevant to all of your students. So many considerations. And I know it seems overwhelming at the moment, but when you actually get into your placement, if you do have a theoretical understanding and knowledge of the curriculum, things will fall into place, I promise you. But I cannot stress enough the importance of developing that understanding, that familiarity with the website and all of the components. So please make sure you have a very good look at that. So I've added this slide in. It's not actually in the PowerPoint slides. I just wanted to really, because we did go through the early years learning framework in terms of pedagogy last week, but I wanted to talk about curriculum as well. So the early years learning framework, it would be considered a low definition curriculum. So a curriculum that's more of a guide or a framework where teachers can interpret it and modify it to suit the specific context. And I know the Australian curriculum is meant to be this as well, but I would say that the early years learning framework is more holistic. It is very much child-centered. So the early years learning framework outlines the key principles, practices, and outcomes of teaching and learning to be considered in each learning environment, in each setting. And it also has a big emphasis on transition to school. So from prior to school, so kindergarten into prep. Excuse me. So like the Australian curriculum, it's essential that the content is considered alongside a shared philosophy of teaching. So that will be the individual teacher's philosophy, philosophy as a group of colleagues, philosophy as of the learning environment, and also taking into consideration the parents and the community as well. So a lot of considerations. But again, they all seem to fall into place when there is collaboration and discussion, and of course, critical reflection of those theoretical frameworks. One other very important part in considering curriculum are your ethical considerations, as we discussed in terms of teacher professionalism. So always having those ethics and the safety and well-being of individual students at the back of your mind. So the early years learning framework, so we can also work with the Queensland Kindergarten Learning Guidelines, and of course some environments have their own documents as well. For example, C&K, they have their own curriculum document as well, which has recently been changed. So building waterfalls for those early childhood teachers has been adapted now too. I think I mentioned that in the last week. Okay, so for the early childhood students, again, you need to be familiar with this document prior to your kindergarten placement. And for our early years, that will be later on this year. So I will discuss that with you further later as well. All right, so the curriculum reflects the purpose of education. which is consistently being discussed and debated with a very broad range of diverse views and values, constantly informing this debate. So it makes curriculum complex. So it involves many considerations of how policy translates into practice. So with a lot of variation over different educational settings. So the process of planning and then, and then enacting curriculum can therefore be quite difficult, and in some settings where there are conflicting beliefs and values, it can be quite uncertain. I do think that the key to planning and implementing the curriculum is making the purpose of education central to our decisions. So as a pre-service teacher, I would hope that you are developing these understandings, because these views are really going to influence your decisions about practice and how you're going to enact the curriculum. So what are your thoughts? What is the purpose of education in Australia? Who wants to go first? Shall I select randomly, or would someone like to volunteer?
I can go.
Thanks, Zoe.
I guess the first thing that I thought of was the idea that education is closely linked to Australia's economy, and if we have a good education system and we are having young people taught how to read and write and be literate also in technology as well, then when they leave school and when they become adults, they are useful citizens and can work and help build the economy, and they're not having jobs and having to depend on the government for support. So I guess that's one aspect of it that I had thought of first.
No, that's a really important one. So being an active participant in society, I guess, that's vital. It really is. Thank you. Thanks for that. Anyone else?
I was just going to say also, it kind of teaches social norms as well. So yeah, if people don't go to school and interact with other students, then they might not learn lots of the social norms, because families are often different as well in that aspect.
So how to not just actively participate in society, but to fit into our society. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, no, good. Another great one. What else? There's heaps of them. So basically whatever you say is not going to be wrong. So feel free to contribute. Anything else?
This is similar to what Zoe said, but I think it's about equipping students with skills so they can go into the workforce having lots of knowledge, and they can go through whatever career path they want to.
Excellent. So job preparation. That's a really important one, Jess. Yeah, great. What else?
Maybe just again, sort of similar to what Zoe was saying as well, but more in the sense of not just for work in the economy, but live successfully, to live, for young people to live their fullest lives, to not, lose any of that.
Good. Yeah. Fantastic, AJ. Yeah, that's a really important one. Let's see the chat. To promote equity, lifelong well-being. Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. Anyone else?
It's like a safe environment for students to grow. And
Yeah.
I don't know, yeah.
No, I get what you mean. So safe, I guess, in terms of acceptance, I think. Would that be a factor there? Safe, and that they accept other people's perspectives and values and differences, but also, that's a good one. Very important. So safety, to feel safe. I wonder how that translates as a teacher. How do you assist your students in feeling safe? what might that involve? Any thoughts? What about
Creating like a discourse of like,
yeah,
of like you said, yeah, like you said, acceptance, but also like just like neutrality, I suppose. So like no bias over like anyone who they are and where they've come from.
yeah, no, that's good. Very good. Yeah. So lots of discussion, critical reflection. So getting back to that critical pedagogy, talking about social justice issues, being accepting of diversity, understanding and appreciating people's histories and stories. Yeah, all of those important things. So making them front and center to our practice. Excellent. Some really important points that you have said. I actually, when my son Luca he was in his lunch break and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing some work, and he was gaming with his mates. I think there must have been about 4 online. I'm assuming that he was in his lunch break. And I said to him, ask your mates what they think the purpose of education is. And because I just wanted to get that perspective of a 15-year-old. And Luca responded, he said, to facilitate growth for future life. And someone else said for self-discovery. So I think, that actually says a lot. So growth for future life. So they're thinking about who they're going to be in the future. And I guess that does involve how they can contribute to society. But I don't think everyone at that age is thinking about the job that they're going to get. I think it's more about developing an understanding of who they are and discovering what their interests are, what their strengths are. So, knowing what they want to do in the future. And I think that's a really important aspect that Luca brought up there. So if we look at the goals for education in Australia, we can look at the Melbourne Declaration on Education. So from 2008, it acknowledges that there are many challenges and also opportunities moving into the 21st century. So we don't know what jobs are going to be needed or going to be available in the future. But they provided 2 fairly general goals to guide Australian education, and these were also very influential in the development of the Australian professional standards. So the first goal was Australian schooling should promote equality and excellence. The second goal was that all young Australians will become successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens. So that pretty much covers what you've been unpacking, what you've talked about. But we need to remember that these need to be central to our decisions about practice and how we choose to enact curriculum. So the pedagogical approaches that we use. Does anyone want to add anything more to that before we move on? Thank you for those of you who contributed to that discussion. So looking at the standards, we always seem to come back to the standards. We've established that the standards describe elements of high quality, effective teaching with a specific focus, as you can see on the slide, teacher knowledge, practice and engagement. So this is across the different stages in a teacher's career. So this one on the slide is specifically graduate. So this is what you would be focusing on in your placements. So I want you to have a look at the standards. It's quite small, but do your best. And I want you to see if you can identify where knowing, understanding, and applying curriculum actually fits in. So you can see it explicitly, but I want you to think also generally how it might fit in with our guide to being professional practitioners. Give you a moment to have a think about it. Any thoughts? What about explicitly? Where can we see curriculum actually being outlined? Which standard?
So 2.3, obviously.
Yeah.
You could also like say it extends into stuff like 3.1, establishing challenging learning goals, and like 5.1 as well, assess student learning.
Assess student learning, yeah.
Mm.
So that, as you said, the obvious one, Lachlan, is know the content and how to teach it. And we can see it explicitly there, curriculum assessment and reporting. And there was another one as well, information and communication technology, so ICT. But we all can also see it over there in maintaining student safety. So describe strategies that support students' wellbeing and safely working within school and or system, curriculum and legislative requirements. So that's very much saying, I guess, that the student safety and well-being needs to be within curriculum requirements. And this to me is sort of talking a little bit about that power, the balance of power in that. So from a top-down perspective, maintaining student safety. And I think, if we think about the safe schools policy, remember when there was all the debate about discussions of sex and sexuality in schools across Australia, and there was so much debate and a lot of unhappy people about what should and shouldn't be discussed in schools and how it should be discussed. So, that decisions about practice, and we're going to talk about the hidden curriculum fairly soon, but, there are so many areas that we need to think about, but generally it's evident across, curriculum is evident across all standards. So guiding how we enact the content through our professional knowledge, our choices about professional practice, and again, our professional engagement. So how we discuss and collaborate around curriculum decisions. So yeah, again, it's important that we bring it back to those professional standards, because these are the standards that you will be judged on in your professional experience, in your placement. So they always need to be central to your practice. So we're going to have a breakdown some different types of curriculum. So these were outlined in the textbook reading that you would have had. So in the process of designing learning experiences, lessons and whole units of work, teachers, they need to consider the government's intended or official curriculum. So this is what outlined the knowledge that is currently valued in our society, and that will change, as we know it does with every variation of the curriculum document. So this overarching document, the curriculum, it influences what is taught in schools, what learning is measured and when. It's updated regularly based on research evidence and changes in policy, both at state and federal levels. So there are many variations, and there is some contention about, when a new variation comes out with a successive government, there is very little time to implement it and to make it part of the school before it then changes again. So there is some concern, one of many concerns around curriculum in Australia. So then we look at a state government level. So each state and territory will have a varied curriculum again, so with different focuses and considerations. So these will influence the reason, the purpose, and the design at that state level. And this interpretation is then intended to be implemented with some flexibility by individual schools. So again, this will be according to jurisdictional and system policies and the context of the individual setting. So as discussed last week in terms of pedagogy, this would involve schools developing their own pedagogical frameworks with choices around how they implement the curriculum content. So it's a process. It really is a process to get to that final micro level. So this is where teachers, individual teachers, are encouraged to then apply their creativity and their personal understanding of curriculum, of pedagogy, of assessment, and of reporting. So this is what is interpreted, translated, and finally enacted in actual practice. So adapting and modifying, often in the moment, as is appropriate to cater for the needs of students. So that is the teacher's role at that micro level, and ideally putting learners at the centre. So finally getting down to, the learner as the centre of your considerations, that individual learner. So importantly, in enacting curriculum, we also need to acknowledge here that the pedagogical and personal beliefs and values of each and every teacher and context is going to play a significant role in what is actually translated into practice. So, the difference between that intended and official curriculum and I guess what is enacted in the end, there may be some variation in that, and there is some consistency across state schools, but again it will vary considerably. And this is what you're going to find out and you need to reflect on when you go out into each of your placements. So the table, you'll be familiar with this one from previous weeks, but as we can see, it just points out that curriculum sits as one of the many factors influencing and shaping teacher as practitioner and decisions on how the curriculum is enacted. So in this week's seminar, Jen mentioned the reading wars, and some of you may be familiar with this term. It involves, decisions around how to teach curriculum, so specifically reading, and it has become heavily politicised and value-based. So there's a very large body of evidence on how children learn to read and how best to teach them, with an ongoing debate between phonics and whole language approaches. So it's caused a lot of tension and conflict in schools and early years settings. This recent study that was outlined in this article, it aims to end the so-called reading words, with research actually indicating that phonics, it's an essential foundation in the early stages of learning to read, but it's only part of the approach and it needs to be taught within context. So with children's literature and their own writing being central. So the research, it also suggests that it's important to take a unified national approach to ensure that the level of phonics instruction in every state, in every educational setting, is similar. So to provide consistency in curriculum and also in pedagogical approaches. But how is this going to be done with so much, as we say, it's politicized and it's value-based within certain contexts? But I think what the article is saying is that we need to focus on the research. This needs to be central to those curriculum decisions. So in reality, from the research, extensive research, what direction should we take? So yeah, again, something that you can talk to your supervising teacher about and observe and reflect critically on how reading is taught in the individual placements that you're going to be experiencing and observing. So 2 more areas, types of curriculum that were unpacked in the reading for this week. The negotiated curriculum, so that involves learners having agency, so with their desires, their passions, their interests central to decisions about what knowledge should be valued. So unlike the intended or official curriculum, a negotiated curriculum would involve the educator having conversations. So conversations with learners and with their families about their experiences, about their culture, about their values, identifying their strengths and their interests. So in this case, curriculum is co-constructed and planned and negotiated. The next one, emergent curriculum. This is mostly used in early childhood settings, but it's also found in primary schools. It's a very child-centered and child-directed approach. So the educator doesn't impose an initial plan or may have a loose plan based on curriculum content, but instead the child directs the learning, so directs meaningful experiences. And central to the emergent curriculum is the use of intentional teaching practices. So this is a really important part of the early years learning framework. So practices and strategies such as observing, actively listening to students, questioning, so really open-ended, inquiry-based questioning, and guiding students with those questions. So early years learning experiences, they emerge from the interactions between the environment, the child, and the educator in this case. And it's about the educator having an open mind about what learning should or could possibly take place in any given moment. It's very spontaneous. I've got an example up next because sometimes these concepts, they can be a little bit difficult to get your head around. Some of you, we had some of our external students who are actually currently teaching in early years environments that were familiar with the emergent curriculum, and others that said it's not something that's used in their learning environment. So it will vary. And if you make a decision that you want to try using these particular approaches, it needs to be discussed with your supervising teacher and how you're actually going to do it and the reasons behind it. So this example, it's from a kindergarten learning environment. So it was from a pre-service teacher's planning example. So from a discussion with a small group of children who had observed a spider building a web. So the teacher sat down in the playground with some butcher's paper, and the interested students, children, sat with her. So it may not have been the entire group, but it could have been a group of interested students. So as you can see, she started with their prior knowledge, so what they knew about spiders. So they came up with things like, they had 8 legs, they make webs, safety things, don't touch them, they eat bugs, and they're hairy. So among other things, that was what they identified as their prior knowledge. So next they looked at what they wanted to find out. So what sort of spider, what do spiders eat, where is the poison, how do they make their webs, and, can I make a web? So the sorts of things that the students were particularly interested in. Excuse my husband there in the background. Thanks, Bob. He's getting leads. Getting leads to set his base up, I would imagine. Okay, so there's that third question. So who or what can help us? This is really important in these inquiry-based processes. The obvious one, I guess, Google it. Books, if you're old school, My Dad and Spider-Man. So as it turned out, one of the children's fathers was an arachnologist. So the student teacher organised for him to come in later and have a chat to the students. So that was great. They actually saw it in context, and he'd written a book, and they had a copy of the book, and they looked at it and unpacked it and looked at all of the different types of spiders. So it was a real, collaborative journey as well. And there was lots of experimentation with web construction and, of course, things like web shooters. And together they collected information and set up a documentation area. So with pictures, labels, to encourage language and literacy development. And the student teacher also documented that she went to the museum and got some samples and resources and things as well that she could share with the students. So as you can see, this process, it was, the planning was done by the children, and it was documented by the student with what we call a learning story. And that would have included follow-up ideas, links to the early years learning framework, learning principles and outcomes, and also to the Australian professional standards. So with details about the evaluation of the teaching strategies and approaches used. And also at the bottom, there would have been a little box where the supervising teacher would have also evaluated, and they would have discussed moving forward and what the student actually learned from the experience and how they're going to move on to that in further practice. So food for thought for those of you, and I have seen these sorts of emergent curriculum concepts at a higher level, of course, used in secondary very successfully. So with inquiry-based and project-based learning. Any questions at all about the emergent curriculum? No? Negotiated curriculum? Okay. So these next 3 curriculum types, they include ideas and practices related to what is taught and how, and decisions around things like the choice of resources, the purposeful organisation of time, could be things like school rituals and routines, because these will vary from school to school, the texts used and given authority, so what books are used to unpack in English, in literature, the interactions, the purposeful interactions between teachers and students, so building of relationships, and assessment and grading systems as well. So I guess while the formal or intended curriculum, it consists of the planned learning, knowledge and skills that educators teach children and students. The hidden curriculum, it consists of all of the unspoken or the implicit academic, social and cultural messages that are communicated to children and students while they're in school. So this could be things like values, stereotypes, assumptions, social expectations around gender, sexuality, language, behaviour, or morals. So all of these are embedded in what is said and done, often unintentionally by teachers and also by fellow students as well. So the null curriculum, so what is chosen not to be taught, what knowledge and things like intellectual processes, student and family histories, so what is not, what is excluded from the curriculum. So every day as educators, we make decisions about what learning to censor or to ignore. And this may be around what teachers might regard as being sensitive topics such as sex and sexuality, death or domestic violence. These issues, they might be deliberately ignored by educators, or sometimes talk around them might be discouraged, even though they might be something that students have shown an actual interest in finding out about. So many reasons behind this. It could be because the teacher is embarrassed or doesn't know how to broach the topic. They may not have the skills to do it, or possibly the understandings. Or in a school-wide context, it might be seen as contentious or possibly counter to community beliefs and values. So the notion of the null curriculum, it raises really important issues about what children and young people actually learn in schools. The decision making and the power of the educator, and again, going directly back to the purpose of education as well. So finally, the lived curriculum. Often this can be the most important thing that students learn from their schooling. So it may not be planned or contained in the official curriculum, but in this sense, educators create it with with the children and young people. And this is where I think critical pedagogy often comes into play. So where contradictions and challenges are unpacked as they arise. And this can really importantly support student and children's understanding around things like social justice and equity. Okay, so hidden, null and lived curriculum. So we've got an example on this slide, an example of a reflection by a pre-service teacher, and the hidden curriculum is picked up here. I want you to read through it. I'll give you the chance to read through it. It's about what the student is learning about herself within the context of her schooling. Have a read. Give me a thumbs up when you've finished. Okay. What are your thoughts? Where does the hidden curriculum factor in here?
Probably like with like the student Matilda, like the where it says bombarded with provocative images of what it means to be a desirable female in the TV ads. So like her weight and everything, she's feels like she has to fit in with all the popular girls, and by doing that, she's not fitting in because she's got these images. So she feels like she's not fitting in, and therefore she's eating eating alone at lunchtime and stuff like that.
Yeah. But, the comment from her peer, oh, lose some weight, that is those sorts of things that, people say under their breath, or, it's just reinforcing how that student is feeling about themselves. So I guess in terms of this, it's important that these issues are discussed, that they're unpacked in practice, that if these tensions, if these, if these factors aren't actually addressed, then, if teachers choose not to, there can be serious situations here. Yeah, Maggie said enabling student diversity. Yeah, for people to feel confident about themselves, that, they're not alone in these things, that unpacking how, what it means to be a desirable female on the TV ads, and unpacking this, many other students, and not just girls as well, may be feeling this way. So it's important that we include these in the curriculum. Any other thoughts about this reflection? So the student is saying that I must, these wonderings have made me think differently about the importance of the classroom environment and the role I must take in order to create a classroom community that includes everyone. And again, it relates back to these standards as well. So the standard that we were talking about, student safety, so safety and well-being, and it's actually a responsibility of us as teachers to ensure that safety and well-being of students, that they do fit in the learning community and are in a space where they feel safe and where they can learn as well. If you have no confidence, or yourself, or you don't feel part of the learning environment, then you're not going to learn effectively. Okay, so another example in terms of Indigenous history for this one. So if we think of the NUL curriculum, often it's seen as cultural and political, so a part of the official curriculum. But this Guardian article, it noted that when questioned about the lack of content around these specific issues, time was noted as being the issue. So in a crowded curriculum, decisions are made every day about what to include and exclude. But in this situation, the Indigenous history, the Aboriginal massacre, stolen generations and reconciliation, this component was chosen not to be included. So the power and choice around what to exclude moment by moment, it was in the hands of the teacher in this case, and often is. So teachers, administrators, and parents, they all contribute to establishing and maintaining this NUL curriculum. So it's important to remember that it isn't just a cultural and political decision at that higher level. It is at that micro level as well. All right, so we have discussed a lot or I have done a lot of talking in this particular learning forum in terms of curriculum. But I want to actually think about where to next. So you've engaged, you've read, you've unpacked your ideas and understandings in EUB104 in stepping in. So what now? Where are you moving now? So we've really looked at, in this particular unit, but also over the course of the degree and moving into professional practice, you're going to be drawing on each of these concepts that we've discussed. So teacher as learner, professional researcher, practitioner, and of course as change agent. So drawing on each of these concepts and the personal and professional reflections that you've made in your engagement each week. So you would be reflecting on your personal beliefs and values and how these might influence practice, and thinking about who you are and the sort of teacher that you want to be moving into your future practice. So how will you develop and maintain things like resilience, a growth mindset, and how will you enact change and support your practice through ongoing learning? So lots to think about and reflect on further moving into other units and into your placements. So in terms of skill development in the unit, you will be using and building on your observation and reflection skills. So in each of your placements, you'll observe and reflect on student learning and the practices of your supervising teacher, and also observing and reflecting on the learning environment. So the use of resources, the way things are positioned, behaviour management strategies and skills. And also the content and engagement from this unit, it's going to provide you with a foundation that will be used in later units and again while on professional development. So key concepts such as learners and learning and of course curriculum and pedagogy, they're going to be used in units like EUB106, so Introduction to Curriculum, Pedagogy and Assessment. We also encourage you to keep building on your teaching strategies companion, so adding tools to your toolkit. This will be essential, and making sure you keep up to date with your reading and taking notes effectively, all important skills that you need to continually use in other units moving into the second part of the year and to next year as well. So we're going to touch on professional experience. So as you can see on the slide, you'll be doing over the next 3.5 years a minimum of 80 days of supervised teaching, where of course you're going to be linking theory from your units into practice, and you're going to have the opportunity to observe, reflect and engage as a part of developing these important skills. So on the slide, you can see the breakdown for early childhood to start with. We've got 90 days over 5 placements for our early childhood students. So as you can see, the first one is kindergarten in semester 2 of this year, so EUB140. Professional experience, introduction to childhood practice in kindergarten. So that will be from the 24th of August to the 11th of September. So 15 days in weeks 6 to 8. So that's why I did say that a priority needs to be made in terms of becoming familiar with the early years learning framework for our early childhood students. So you're going to be doing 5 placements in total, including the birth to 2 environment in second year. Moving on to the primary and secondary, you can see they're very similar. 4 placements. First one being in EUB104, Year 2, Semester 1. 80 days in total, and it's important to remember that the Professional Experience Office who organises your placements, they work tirelessly to make sure that you have a good experience across the grades and the years, and also subject areas as well for our secondary students. So also important, some factors to remember, that when you need to make sure that you keep your details up to date. So for example, your address. If you're currently living in Logan and next semester you might move somewhere else to West End, for example, and you haven't changed your details, you will be placed in Logan, not in West End. So your Professional Experience Office take note of that and try and get you as close to your home base as possible. So it's important that you keep those up to date. You also need to make sure that to attend your placements, you need to maintain a minimum GPA of 4, and you also need to meet the Landtite benchmarks. So more information will be given to you about Landtite, and practice exams and things are going to be organised by the Student Success Group. Also, you need to have a valid blue card that's connected to QUT. All of the details, everything that you need to know will be unpacked in these units. So you'll have weeks prior to placement where you will be supported and where you will be given strategies and skills and understandings to support you in meeting the progression tables that you'll be given. So the Professional Experience website will be the site where you'll be able to access your progression tables, details about your practice folder where you all can keep all of your planning and observations and reflections, and all other requirements about your placement. Does anyone have any questions about placement at this time? Is there anything that you're wondering about? No? All right, so what about questions around assessment task 2? How are we sitting? So Jen has posted all 3. So we've got all 3 case studies are up, and she's encouraging you to complete them in turn. So before moving on to 2 and 3, make sure you've finished the first one. Any questions at all? This will be the last face-to-face opportunity that you're going to have here to ask questions. Of course, you can pop the questions on the Padlet. It's growing daily, so I would encourage you, as I said last week, to make sure you read through the Padlet regularly. No questions?
Jen, I was just wondering if after this learning forum, it's a good time to start number 3.
Have you finished number 2?
Yeah.
Oh, you can start at any time then. So basically, so 3 is a script for a screenplay. Have you had a look at it yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Has anyone had a look? Is anyone up to number 3 yet? No, that's okay. So it's a script for a screenplay is the stimulus. So it's following the story of Scott, a secondary pre-service teacher on placement, and it sort of goes through lots of different issues that he's had, and how he wishes he'd had more knowledge and experience, and how he might have handled particular issues differently. So, for example, we see him wishing that he felt more comfortable teaching curriculum and had more knowledge around curriculum prior to going out on placement. So pretty much what I said to you, and wishing that he had confidence to take risks around curriculum. So basically you're asked to decide on a critical moment again, or a critical incident like we did in the first two case studies, something that you find really interesting, that you're wondering about, that's stimulated your interest. And Jen actually gave a hint, or she just said to look for underlined wishes, I think she said. And when I had a look at that, it's basically it's indicating incidences where there is a real critical reflection that you might like to reflect on. But as with the other two, try and make it as narrow as possible. It's really important that it's a specific incident. And Jen has also provided on Blackboard, sitting underneath the third case study, it's a Padlet outlining the sustainable period project that that's mentioned in the script. So that's just for your reference. It's like a tool or resource that you could refer to. So again, any questions that you may have, I encourage you to pop them onto the Padlet. Anything else? I'd also encourage you to revisit the examples that were unpacked. So Jen unpacked one using the 4 R's framework, and then I unpacked one using the criteria sheet. Okay. So finally, on the slide, we've got some reflections, some points to reflect on. It's quite a lot to think about at the moment. I think I just want you to focus right now on one particular thing, and that's one important thing that you learnt about yourself in regards to the teacher that you want to be. So what's the most important pedagogical approach or belief or understanding that you're going to take away from the unit? Who would like to share just one point? I'm not going to ask you to discuss all of these on the slide for now. One thing. Maggie says, teacher as change agent. That's a big one. You know, having the capacity, the confidence, the resilience to make changes in your environment. And that might be small changes as teacher, as practitioner, or it could be major changes in your school or learning environment context. I think building relationships is probably something that I do recall in my first year that had an impact on me, just how important it is to establish those relationships and trust with students in terms of, you know, getting to know them, but also with things like behaviour management and looking at the reasons behind behaviour and things like lack of engagement. I think that was something that was really important to me. Anything else anyone would like to share? And someone's saying that they were impressed by I do, you do, we do. Yeah, so gradual release of responsibility. Nothing else? Being resilient.
I just want to say that you were a really good tutor, Angela. I'm pretty glad that we had you over this unit.
Very sweet. Thank you very much, Lachlan.
No worries.
Very sweet. I have to say it has been a challenge for some of you who committed to going to university face to face. And I just can't imagine how difficult it's been moving from that face-to-face to an online environment and still feeling like you're able to engage, because it's not ideal for everyone. And I do understand and appreciate that. And I'm just hoping that we're moving into semester 2 with more of a face-to-face component to our teaching. Yeah. I think, you know, for me, some of the things that I really want to encourage for all of you moving into next semester is that you really do make the most of your learning at QUT. So really making sure that you engage with the content, that you do your readings and those activities, because it makes such a difference. And I can see that reflected in the assessment as well. Like, really shows those students that have really week by week engaged with those activities, and it will make moving into your professional experience, your placements, so much easier. You'll have more confidence. It's very, very beneficial to make the most of it. There are so many resources, and it's important that you unpack them. Also, that I cannot stress enough is to engage and collaborate with each other. So really develop your communities of practice, because these are going to be an important support as you move into your placements as well. So really making those strong connections. And also they're going to be, you know, you may not realize it now, but lasting connections moving into your professional experience as well. I'm still in contact with some of my fellow students that I did my teaching study with, and we still share stories and strategies. So it's important to make those links. So what I've actually done is, you know, some of these are things that you might want to think more in depth about, but I really would like you to reflect on them. And I would like, I guess, for my own evaluation as well, to see what you have taken out of the unit. So what I've done is, for my particular students in my 4 tutorials that I do, I have set up a Padlet. You may have seen it when you came on, when you looked for the Zoom link. So it's included just under the Zoom invitation in the Zoom invitation folder on Blackboard. So for those of you who were in my particular classes, I would really appreciate it if you did share those reflections. Take a moment to reflect. It would be good for you, I think, and good for each other to see what each of you have shared as well. All right, so that is enough for me. As per usual, I'll pop us into gallery mode, Brady Bunch view, and I'm going to go off, and what time is it? I'm going to have something to eat. I had 1 piece of toast for breakfast, so I'm very hungry. So I'm going to head off and, again, give you the opportunity, if you want to have a chat. Might want to share emails or whatever if you haven't already, just to give you that opportunity to make those connections. Okay, thank you everybody, and all the best for your future study, and hopefully I will catch up again sometime soon.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ange.
Ange, for everything.
Thanks, Ange.
Pleasure indeed.
Thank you so much, Ange. You've been amazing.